to one of the stalwarts of the U.S. Israel relationship in the Democratic Party. And it is so, so important, as Senator Mark Murphy just said, that this issue remain a bipartisan issue. We are relying on people such as Congressman Eliot Engel, who for years and years has been responsible for so much legislation, including the Syrian Accountability Act, which made the Syrian troops actually for a brief period of time leave Lebanon. Recently, the acts against funding UNRWA, and he has been basically our right-hand person within the Democratic Party. He is the head of the Israel Allies Caucus for the Democratic Party, and during this last year, Congressman Eliot Engel really showed what a profile and courage he is, because he came to bat against this very pernicious Iranian nuclear deal and actually called up the president, met with him many, many times. It was not easy as a Democrat to do that. And so it is my profound pleasure and honor to be able to present Eliot Engel with one of our Winston Churchill Awards for moral integrity.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. You know, I wanted you to keep talking. It's great, and I always say when someone gives me such a wonderful introduction, I wish two of the women in my life could be to hear it. My wife and my late mother. I want everyone to know my mother would believe every wonderful word this word and my wife would have wondered who the heck you were talking to. But Sarah and I have known each other for a long, long time. It's probably about 25 years. And in those times, she has been tirelessly fighting for fair principles in the Middle East, not only from our United States government, but from every place you could think of. Sarah's been there battling, she's been consistent. If she gets knocked down, she picks herself right up and she comes back and charges twice as hard. And so when she asked me about this, I was very honored and very, very pleased to get an award from this organization. You know, and of course we know it's truth, and it's important to get the truth out, because those of us that are friends and allies and supporting Israel understand that the truth doesn't get out. It's one-sided. The United Nations in my home city, we want to just scream sometimes with the nonsense that happens, with the silliness, I always sometimes, in a derogatory way, refer to the UN as that paragon of virtue. And I remember that when I was a kid, Avi Ivan used to say that you could put up a proposal that the earth is flat if it was put up by some of the Arab nations, and immediately would get 70 votes. Maybe it's a little less true now, but it's still very, very true when you talk about the Human Rights Commission of the United Nations. I think you're changing it in English, it doesn't matter. It's still the same nonsense. Those of you that know Yiddish, my grandmother would call it Narishkeit, which means foolishness. And that's really what it is. Because with all the atrocities going on in the world, with all the things happening in Syria, and it breaks my heart to see what's happening in Aleppo, Security Council or whoever, what body of the United Nations will always look to condemn Israel for one thing or another. And thank God we have the United States there to protect Israel, to levy a veto when it's important. And it's very, 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 very important to do that. Now, one of the things I have been saying for the past several years is that support for Israel is bipartisan, must remain bipartisan, has to be bipartisan. I'm a ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You all know what that means. Each party selects its leader of each committee, and then the majority party's leader becomes the chair of that committee, and the minority party's leader becomes the ranking member of that committee. So since my party's in the minority, I am the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and Ed Royce of California is the chairman of the committee. But we are very, very lucky because Ed Royce is a wonderful chairman, and we have the most bipartisan committee in the Congress. I wish that the rest of the Congress would follow suit and we see how Ed Royce and I conduct ourselves. Doesn't mean we agree all the time, but we disagree with dignity. We sit down and try to find common ground. We sit down and try to put forward what common ground is, and that's really important. I had about a month ago, or 6 weeks ago, I was getting on one of the trams that takes you from the Rayburn building to the Capitol, and I had one of my colleagues, Republican colleagues, from the committee, who was very, very conservative, a Tea Party member. And he came up to me and said just to me, I just want to thank you for the way you run the committee. And I said, well, I don't actually run the committee, you know. He said, no, but you and Ed Royce run it together, and it's quite obvious. He said, my other committee, all they do is fight. Democrats and Republicans spend the whole time fighting. Well, I believe that foreign policy should be bipartisan. And when we talk about foreign policy, partisanship should stop at the water's edge. And I have taken many trips around the world and have taken groups there. When we were in the majority for 4 years, I was chairman of the Western Hemisphere Subcommittee, and as the chair, I ran a lot of the trips to South America, Latin America. Never once was I embarrassed by anybody on that trip, Democrat or Republican, because we're American, and it's important that we have that kind of image when we go abroad, so people understand that, and people see that. And nowhere is that more important than with Israel. It is just so important. I don't want a situation where one party or another party says we're better on Israel than the other party. Israel's not a political football. And Israel should be bipartisan. That's really the good news. Because with all the nonsense we have in the presidential election, with fighting and accusations and finger pointing, support for Israel in the Congress is strong and it's bipartisan. When I came to Congress for the first time in 1989, I was elected in 88 to 89, we could barely get 218 votes, which is what we need to pass for foreign aid. I remember the votes were in the 220s and we weren't sure, whatever. Now foreign aid routinely gets over 300 votes, or in the high 200 votes. You can't do that unless it's bipartisan. Yeah, there are people in parties, in either party or whatever, that we don't like some of the things they do. But if we look at the whole picture, we look at all the Royce Engel letters that have gone out, signed by 360 and 370 people, all talking about a strong U.S. Israel relationship, all talking about how the United States needs to support Israel. When I see that, I feel good because I know that that's bipartisan. And that's what's so important. And you know, much has been made of the fact that Obama and Netanyahu don't like each other, blah, 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 they don't get along or whatever. You want to know something? I don't care if any president or any prime minister doesn't like each other. I want to make sure the U.S.-Israel relationship is so strong and so tight that it almost doesn't matter who's sitting in Jerusalem as the prime minister or who's sitting in Washington as the president. That's what I want to make it happen, what I want to happen. I want to know that when it comes to these ridiculous Security Council resolutions, one-sided and obnoxious, the United States will be there for a veto. I want to make sure that the United States stands by Israel, doesn't say, well, this is what we think we should have in terms of a two-state solution, blah, blah, blah. No, the parties themselves, Israel and the Palestinians, have to sit down and hammer this out. You cannot have an imposition from outside, because Israel can never get a fair deal from outside. It's a kangaroo court, and that's why it has to be important for two countries, two peoples to sit down and talk. Now, some of you may disagree with me, but I have always supported the two-state solution. And I support it because I really think that it's not only good for Palestinians, I think it's good for Israelis, I think it's good for Jews. I think it's good because of the demographics. I worry about the demographics. I worry about one-state solution where Jews become a minority in that state. And so I think that the separation is the better thing to do, but not separation with a gun to your head. Not separation where they tell you what has to happen. Separation where parties have to sit down and negotiate. And unless it's secure, unless all these things come into play, this is why the United States must be strong supporters of Israel, nothing like that could happen. Now, as Sarah mentioned to you, I voted against the Iran deal. It was a tough vote for Democrats. There only were 25 Democrats who voted against the deal. And it's very tough when the president calls you into the Oval Office one-on-one, no staff, and starts telling you why this is important. Well, I told the president why I wasn't going to vote for it. And I told him why, and he said, well, tell me why, because I want you to, maybe I can convince you otherwise. I said to him, Mr. President, let me explain. From the moment those negotiations started, because I'm ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I was privy to all the classified briefings on what was going on week by week, month by month. And I remember the very first time we sat down and we were briefed. They told us that the negotiations were starting, this was it. I asked a simple question. I said, while we're talking to Iran about their nuclear program, are we demanding that they stop spinning centrifuges? Are we demanding that they stop enriching uranium while we're talking? And I was told no. And I said, no. Well, why would we talk to them if they have this thing kind of hanging over our heads? I can tell you that if there's any final deal, it's not going to be to our liking because they have the final word. And I was told, well, Iran wouldn't agree to it. And I said, excuse me, if Iran won't agree to it, what does that tell you about their intentions? What does that tell you down the line in terms of what we're going to wind up with? So I knew from day one this wasn't going to have a good ending. And the frustrating thing with the whole thing was the fact that, to me, it was overreaching. We could only talk to them about their nuclear weapons. We couldn't talk to them about terrorism. We couldn't talk to them about anything that concerns all of us in this room. So I felt like I was in a box. It was very, very difficult. And really, it was ridiculous. So the president said to me, well, tell me what your reasons are. Maybe I can convince you. I said, Mr. President, I have 10 reasons, but I'm going to give you 2. I said, number 1, for all these weeks and months and years, Iran was sanctioned. Iran is only talking to us now because she's sanctioned. She's in a straitjacket. She can't move. We have her where we want her. I said, so they're talking. The tough sanctions that Congress put forward brought them to the table. Okay. During the time that they were sanctioned, they had no money. Their currency, the real, was in the toilet. Their economy was terrible. They had a restive young population that wanted jobs and all kinds of things. Couldn't get it to them. But yet, they couldn't get it to them because they had no money. The Iranian government had no money. And yet, with the Iranian government having no money, Iran still managed to be the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. With no money. So can you imagine, I said to the president, if we do this deal, with all the billions of dollars Iran is going to get, can you imagine the mischief that they can do in terms of international terror? I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of putting money in Hezbollah's pocket. I don't want to be a part of that. And I said, that's my main thing. My second thing is that we were told that the goal of these negotiations was to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. When I look at the agreement, when I read the agreement, it doesn't prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. It postpones it for 15 years. That's what it does. So in 15 years, which happens to be 2030, which now is going to be 13 years pretty soon, Iran will be a nuclear threshold state. Iran will be right there, legally. To me, that's not good enough. And I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And it wasn't a hard call for me. It really wasn't where I sat and I had it. I just knew I couldn't do it. And I said respectfully, and to the president, I will say, was very appropriate. Listened to me and said, well, okay, if you can't do it, can you wait to announce what you're going to do? And I said, no, I'm really going to have to do it pretty soon. Because I don't think it's fair for me to play games. People want to know where I stand. There's nothing that's happened that makes me feel any better about this deal. The deal was signed, and 3 days later, the ink wasn't even dry on the deal. The Ayatollah is in the middle of Tehran leading a big rally, yelling death to America, death to Israel. 3 days after they signed disagree. I mean, I would think that shows bad faith, wouldn't you? So I feel very, very anxious about the deal, because I don't think it's a good deal. Now, I will tell you that I know that President-elect has talked about repealing it. I think we need to be careful, because one of the things that happened with this deal was that we provided billions of dollars of aid to Iran. Iran has already gotten that. So it's cookies, it's goodies, Iran has already gotten. And I worry that if you cancel the deal, they keep the money, they're not giving it back. And yet the things that they agreed to do, that we wanted them to do, would be all torn up and they wouldn't have to do it. So I have to be convinced that by tearing up the deal, it's going to hurt Iran, it's going to hurt us, then I think we need to be careful. So I think the verdict is still out for that. But it's very, very important, I think, that we have a strong foreign policy, that the alliance between the United States and Israel always remains strong. The memorandum of understanding was, I thought, a good deal. Israel is getting more money from the United States than any other country. We've given more money now than any other country in the world at any time in our history. And those of us in Congress in a bipartisan way will continue to come out and support Israel. If we think that there's something that Israel needs, regardless of what was put in that agreement, we're going to come out and we're going to push it. And it's going to be the kind of thing that, again, I think will be bipartisan. People are surprised to hear when we're talking about the election that I know the Vice President-elect very well. Mike Pence was a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. There were many, many days that I spoke with him about Israel, many, many days. I always do that. I think it's important to talk to people in both parties about Israel. It's important to understand that it isn't just the survival of the Jewish state, that Israel and the United States, there's more cooperation now. When you ask the Israelis, they'll tell you I'm going to be in Israel in a couple of weeks. If you ask the Israelis, they will tell you that right now the intelligence sharing with the United States and a military sharing with the United States is better than ever before. We want to keep it that way. We want to keep it that way no matter who's president, no matter who's prime minister. We want to make sure. So I want to thank you for this wonderful award. When you think of a statesman like Award, I can't think of anything better than Winston Churchill. Sarah, again, is a real treasure. I think you will know that. And I want to thank you for your advocacy of Israel. I want to thank you for telling the truth. I want to thank you for all you do. We have to, one only needs to look at what terrorism does. Or one only needs to look at the poor people of Syria right now, in Aleppo, where they are using bunker buster bombs to kill people. It is the most hideous thing. Israel, unfortunately, has had more acts of terrorism against them than virtually any other country. So let me just conclude with this. There is some hope. I think there's some hope. I think there's some hope because when I speak to the Sunni Arab states, and they talk about terrorism, they talk about Iran, and they talk about how they see the Middle East, not the same thing that the Israeli leaders will tell you. Almost the same thing in terms of Iran, in terms of what Iran's doing, in terms of what we need to do with the United States. And so I do think there's hope. I do think there's hope for the future. I hope that the Arab countries, Sunni countries, will continue to understand that Israel is not the enemy. Terrorism is the enemy. And terrorism knows no bounds. You just ask the people in Syria today. So thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for telling the truth. Amen.